Okay, so this is part one for respiratory system. Respiration is the process of getting air from the outside of the body and delivering it to the cells, and then taking those gases from the cells and delivering it back to the outside of the body. And there's 5 parts to it. Ventilation is taking the air from outside and bringing it into the lungs. External respiration is taking the air from the lungs and delivering it into the bloodstream. Transport happens when the gases are transported in the bloodstream. Internal respiration is when the gases go from the bloodstream into the tissues, so into the cells. And then cellular respiration is making ATP using oxygen and then producing carbon dioxide. Now, then we've got to follow this back because we get an internal respiration when that carbon dioxide goes back into the blood. It's transported through the blood, and it's going to go from the blood into the lungs in external respiration, and then from the lungs back out to the body through ventilation. So there's a coming and going. Oxygen is delivered to the cells, it's used by the cells, carbon dioxide is produced, and then sent back out of the body. Here are some of the organs of the respiratory system, and really it's going to start with the nasal cavity, and then go into the lungs, and we'll talk about each of these parts now. So the upper respiratory tract consists of the nose, and that nasal cavity is covered in a mucous membrane. So you have this whole mucous membrane, and that mucous membrane is full of blood vessels, and it's where the pseudostratified ciliated columnar starts for the respiratory system. The mucous membrane warms the air, humidifies it, so it helps to make it moist, and it helps to filter the air coming in. So the air will get stuck to the mucus produced by the mucous membrane. Well, not the air, but bacteria and dust and anything else in there, viruses. There are nasal conchae, and the nasal conchae increase the surface area to help us warm and moisten that air, or humidify the air. The sinuses are really there for voice modulation, and when you get a sinus infection, these get infected and increase the pressure, giving you that sinus headache. Okay, the pharynx we've talked about before with the nasopharynx, the oropharynx, and then the laryngeal or laryngopharynx. Remember, the nasopharynx is where you eustachian tubes, or those auditory tubes, open. All right, mucus in the respiratory tract. The mucus is created by those goblet cells we've talked about in AMP1, and the mucus is there to trap material, and that beats everything. All that mucus and the material is forced towards the pharynx, where it can be swallowed. Because if it's swallowed, it can go down in the stomach, and any bacteria in there can get broken up and can enter the lymphatic system as antigens without hurting us. Sinuses, we talked about these already. Those air-filled spaces help to modulate our voice. We have them in the maxillary bones, frontal bones, ethmoid, and sphenoid bones. The larynx. Larynx has the Adam's apple that is very obvious on men, but less obvious on women. The tissue in the larynx is still, in the lumen at least, is still ciliated. The larynx also has the vocal cords in it. And the vocal cords are 2 pairs of mucous membranes with elastic connective tissue. And we can change the pitch of our voice by changing how tight those vocal cords are. The glottis is the opening in the larynx there, and it's covered with the epiglottis during swallowing, which we talked about in the digestive system. Trachea, that's our windpipe. Trachea has that C-shaped hyaline cartilage there to keep its shape, and the C is open in the back where the esophagus, so the esophagus would be back here. So the esophagus would be back here, and any food that's getting stuck in here can then push into the larynx a little bit. So sometimes, you know, when you eat something larger, you sometimes get that feeling like you're choking, but you know you're not. It's because that food is pushing into the larynx. It's still a mucous membrane, still ciliated. Tracheostomy, don't do this at home, but it's just an interesting thing that you hear about. Sometimes you hear about people doing them when they really shouldn't. But during a tracheostomy, they may do this because they can't, there's an issue with the windpipe or with the larynx or something blocking above the larynx or within the larynx. So they will make a superior to inferior incision and then insert a breathing tube or something into the trachea to allow the person to breathe. Okay, bronchial tree. Bronchial tree, you've got the trachea, and then you've got a two primary bronchi. Singular is bronchus. And the bronchi go one to the right lung, one to the left lung. The right lung has 3 lobes, and the left lung has 2 lobes. That's because the left lung has the heart kind of pushing into it. The right primary bronchus is shorter, it's wider, and it has a decreased angle here, so it's not as much of an angle. Whereas this one, the left one, has a greater angle. And that's probably a nice evolutionary leftover from when, if something gets stuck in here, this area right here where the fork is, it's called the carina. So that's called the carina. See if I can. Carina, good, which is right there. So the carina is a fork. So if you were to swallow something and it got stuck here in the carina, it would block both lungs. But with this one being shorter, wider, with a decreased angle, the material could pass into that right lung and still allow you to use the left lung to breathe. The secondary bronchi, these are called lobar bronchi, L-O-B-A-R. And the lobar bronchi go to each of the lobes. So there's 3 secondary bronchi in the right lung and 2 in the left lung. The tertiary bronchi supply those bronchopulmonary segments of the lungs. And the bronchopulmonary segments are, there are 10 in the right lung and 8 in the left lung. The intralobular bronchioles are where the what we're looking at here. These would be intralobular bronchioles. And this is where you get the end of the cartilage. Terminal bronchioles, these ones right here is a terminal bronchiole. It's terminal bronchiole. These lead into respiratory bronchioles, this one. And the respiratory bronchioles are made of simple cuboidal epithelial tissue. So we've changed the epithelial tissue in there. Alveolar ducts, end of the muscle fibers. So you got no more smooth muscle in the alveolar duct. And then you've got the alveolar sacs, which look like these grape sacs. And the alveolar sacs are made of a bunch of alveoli. And this is where we get, in the alveoli, you get the gas exchange because they're surrounded by those capillary beds. Okay, diffusion across the respiratory membrane. The alveolus is single-celled or simple squamous, so it's single-celled, and the capillary is also simple squamous, so it's single-celled. So oxygen and carbon dioxide can easily diffuse from the alveolus into the capillary, or the capillary into the alveolus. And that happens just with simple diffusion. Well, kind of. All right, stop here for part 1.